our crowdfunding fireside chat. So I've got three wonderful VCs here. In fact, Dharmesh and I know each other. He's one of the kind gentlemen that I got to talk about my company with.
Right.
I'll let you each introduce yourself. 15-second pitch. What's your 15? Why should somebody go to Battery?
Battery believes in helping our entrepreneurs achieve their dreams. As I was the first investor in Mirantis and also involved with Cloudera MongoDB. And between my partner Adrian and I, we're very active trying to find other companies in the cloud infrastructure space. So if you've got a big idea, you want to come get our help, I'm happy to talk to you as well. So it's my 15-second version.
Elise?
Yeah, Elise Huang, partner at the Westsummit Capital. We are also first investor together with Dharmesh in Mirantis since Series A. So we are a cross-border, more like global tech growth stage venture firm focused on cloud, big data, internet media, and IoT space.
So I'm Vivek Mehra with general partner at August Capital. We've had almost 20 years of experience working with entrepreneurs, helping them kind of achieve their vision. We like working with technical founders who have an incredible vision and have an ability to execute.
So I think all three of you represent companies that have made significant investments in open source companies, and particularly of recent. Talk a little bit about your perception of open source and the revenue models, because I think there's a lot of question, particularly you look at the rise of Docker, there's a lot of question about how these companies support the valuations that they're driving and where you think that's headed.
Yeah, I can start if you'd like to. So yeah, before I got to Battery, just by way of context, I used to manage enterprise investments for Intel Capital, where I invested, as I mentioned, Cloudera, MongoDB, Mirantis, and a few others. And I'd say over the last 5 years, and prior to that, I was an operator in the infrastructure space as well with Exodus Communications, Keynote Systems, and others. And I'd say over the last 5 years, probably 7 years, open source has done a tremendous job in terms of getting a lot of people to try complex technology and get their hands on it, which is phenomenal. It's a developer-led adoption. My partner Adrian Cockcroft from his days at Netflix talked about that a lot. And I think it's great to break the barriers of trying new technology and see how it solves problems. The challenge comes when CIOs are rewarded to manage a business, not to take experiments, need to then productize that, right? So when we were in MongoDB, for instance, we had 3 million developers trying NoSQL and Mongo, but ultimately somebody needs to displace an Oracle instance or a MySQL instance. So transitioning from a developer-led open source project to an IT-ready, scalable, infrastructure-ready project that a CIO can sponsor, I think is where the challenge and the opportunity lies. And again, having been involved with Mirantis from the early days where some of the early customers, PayPal, eBay, Cisco, WebEx, and others, started with a hedge against VMware to try to see if this OpenStack thing was working. And we're now in this phase where CIOs say, like Jesse said, can I get an SLA? Can I get my developers to put mission-critical workloads in OpenStack? And so I think we're in the middle of this journey in terms of transitioning from a developer-led to a CIO-led adoption, where the real money is to be made. And I think companies that can crack the code in that transition are the ones that follow the Red Hat path, and others that can crack the code. It's not an easy transition to make. So the business models of open source are pretty challenging. So just getting started as a VC, when I look at companies that get adoption, that's great. But transitioning to the production level deployments, I think remains challenging, and we're still in the early innings of seeing how it works.
So how do you see sort of the billion-dollar-plus valuations being supported when the revenue models are nascent and the technologies aren't necessarily enterprise-ready?
We're not doing them, but I think certainly there's a lot of belief that the markets that you're playing in, there's $150 billion that goes in buying boxes for compute, storage, networking, and there's a lot at stake. And companies that have tremendous developer mindshare, like Docker, which has done a great job getting the mindshare, there's belief in some investors that that mindshare is going to convert into real dollars at some point. The jury's still out, but I think at least there's conviction that that will happen to generate a meaningful $5 to $10 billion return. But remains to be seen how well they do it.
Vivek, Elise, what do you think on that topic?
Sorry. So look, specifically to your question on the billion-dollar valuations, I think a lot of those are driven by potential acquisitions that some big company might do. I think that's from an investor point of view, that's a very risky proposition to do, because the acquirers may or may not come, right? So our firm, we've been involved with a number of open source companies. We look at companies when we feel that they can have a fundamentally stable business model. But to switch back to your earlier question, I think of open source as a development model, a collaborative development model. I think of open source as a distribution model. I don't think of open source as a business model. So we have to differentiate between the development model, distribution models, and the business model. And I think companies, the business model for open source companies is incredibly tough. People underestimate that. And I think startups, when we look at them, we really question and we really ask them how they think about it. We are also, in fact, the entire panel has investors in Mirantis. I think so. We looked at them really hard as to how they would evolve and grow to it. The companies that do it well use open source, either professional services, subscription models, but also often use open source as a building block for something else that they do. And the customer buys the stuff that they do. I had started a company called Cobalt Networks, which is one of the first people to use Linux as an embedded OS in a server appliance. We weren't selling Linux. We were selling the entire internet appliance. People liked that. It's the ease of use that they liked. They didn't really care if it was Linux because it just worked.
So if you look at the OpenStack ecosystem then, let's go from open source to OpenStack. A lot of the early companies, the early distributions, those are gone. They've all been acquired. It's Mirantis left really, and Platform 9 are sort of the two column distribution, independent distributions left. Then you've got a bunch of networking companies on the periphery. This is going to be a biased question because you're all in Mirantis, so the answer is no. But what do you think that the room is and the appetite is in the venture community for additional funding into OpenStack-specific companies? Where can people make an impact here?
Do you want to take that, Elise?
Yeah. I think OpenStack itself, I think is still an attractive investment sector for VCs because the ecosystem is evolving pretty fast. A lot of newer technology, either coming from adjacent sector and coming into the space. But I think it requires continued innovation. The whole OpenStack Foundation is driving that effort as well. So as you said, Platform 9, which is relatively early stage, they're offering more like a SaaS open source solution, which sounds very interesting. That's where Mirantis is driving towards that direction as well. And on that OpenStack, the platform itself, whether from storage, networking, each part of it requires tremendous innovation as well. So we see some interesting early stage startup emerging from the space. I think that will drive the innovation.
So I feel somewhat different about it than that. I'm not too religious about OpenStack or an open source project or what have you. I think about this more from the CIO perspective, right? And so if you're a web scale company, you small business, you should start on AWS and you really have no business, stand up your own private cloud. But if you're a large enterprise that is in the business of running a mission critical cloud, and you want to future-proof your IT infrastructure, because as a CIO, your job is to support your businesses while managing cost. I think OpenStack is a means to an end to provide kind of an open cloud platform, right? So I think we're in that, a lot of people were kind of initially experimenting, hey, do we take CloudStack, Eucalyptus, Nimbula, OpenStack, and we looked at all those guys when I was looking at the ecosystem back in 2011. And I think for a variety of reasons, a big part of it being the community support, OpenStack kind of emerged as a leader out of that context. And so a bunch of CIOs or IT executives tried at a small scale, tens to hundreds to maybe a few thousand nodes. Some of the early customers like Symantec, Walmart are kind of in that higher scale. They experimented with this and said, hey, this is robust enough for me to put my mission critical apps on it. I think as Mark Shuttleworth just said in the presentation before this, we're in that phase from ice to water or steam, something along those lines. But we're kind of in that transition to production scale deployment where, if I got tens of thousands of developers at a large bank, I need to have them put mission critical workloads on OpenStack. I need to make it secure. I need to have an SLA. I need to make sure that it supports bare metal and VMs and containers and 3 different flavors of VMs and containers. So graduating from that experimentation phase to production deployment, I think OpenStack provides a means to an end to that open native cloud, the private cloud, if you will. And I think the opportunities we find interesting are in the surrounding areas, not necessarily at the OpenStack distro per se, but ways to make OpenStack more consumable by developers, ways to support different container formats and OCI on OpenStack, ways to provide an SLA, a management layer around it. so that if you wanted that end-to-end stack, which is not VMware-centric or perhaps Red Hat-centric, you basically have those areas to run mission-critical business processes. So I think it's the ancillary and the adjacent areas around OpenStack as the foundation that we're more interested in. And the question then is, is there a billion-dollar company to be made over there or a multi-billion-dollar company to build over there? Don't know that yet. But
I think it's interesting from the entrepreneur perspective. So if I look at the last 5 years in OpenStack and enterprise adoption, really, if you look at where the bulk of the spend exists, it exists in these Fortune 1000 companies. Yeah. But the adoption very early on was not there. We've now hit this point where adoption is there, but what I've seen now 90 days into IBM is that they go to their trusted vendors. So they go to IBM, they go to HP, they go to Red Hat, they go to the companies that they've been buying with for years, and that's where they start. And so I saw at Blue Box the ability to have a conversation with a Fortune 1000. We could get started, but we would get blocked very quickly. Yet in IBM, those conversations have progressed in a very materially different way. Yeah. And so I think that's an interesting challenge as you think about companies coming into the ecosystem. How do you take an organization that's brand new, that's building something that's fundamentally different, and get the CIO to trust it? It goes back to your enterprise maturity or your readiness point earlier on. It's a pretty fascinating time right now.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Intel investment and collaboration, more importantly, with Mirantis is kind of up-levels the position for them to have a conversation with CIOs, right? Because when you have a few hundred people from Intel contributing to the OpenStack Foundation along with the trusted vendor there, it does certainly open up elevate the discussion level quite a bit. But I agree with you, it wasn't easy going in the early days of the OpenStack game for startups.
So now we're getting into the world of containers, and that's exploded over the last 24 months. How do you see containers impacting OpenStack and really the container ecosystem evolving from an investment perspective?
Look, one of the challenges in our industry is there's always the next shiny object that comes along, right? And I think everyone kind of moves to that. Containers have existed for a very long time. What recently it's been made is they've just been made really easy to consume. So I think it's a great technology. I think it should become first-class citizens on OpenStack. Containers are solving a certain kind of problems, and OpenStack solves a certain. And if they coexist, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for both of those things. I think getting back to the investment thing, one of the big mistakes entrepreneurs make is that there is a bunch of buzz around it, and all of a sudden, us as VCs start seeing a spate of companies in that area. And if I see 5, means I don't see every company. If I see 5, there's probably 25 others that I don't see. So a common mistake is something becomes hot, and then everyone starts jumping into it. But in some ways, the winners have already been made. The reason there's a conference around an event is there's already an ecosystem. And why do you want to start a new company in a system that's already fairly mature and the winners are likely made? So where, I think to Dharmesh's point, where people should start focusing is not what, if containers succeed, what are the problems that they will face 3 years down the road? Start working on that now. Okay. Not on just yet another container thing or yet another OpenStack stuff. When people deploy OpenStack in production, what will be the issues? That's what people should be working on. Yeah.
What do you see those issues to be? What if you could hold your crystal ball out? What's the next thing in 3 years?
We placed some bets in that area. AppFormic, Sumit was here. That's a company that we invested 2 years before. We felt that as applications became more cloud native, there would be huge management issues, there'd be huge performance, huge monitoring issues. And of course, the red light, green light doesn't work on the dashboard because humans aren't. But people need to see those, and then can you do stuff automatically behind it? It's the same thing that operating systems do. If applications die, you can restart daemons, you can do. Why not do that at a cloud level? So these are the kinds of problems that AppFormic is solving that we were pretty interested in, and we invested 2 years ago. So if I was to do it now, it would be 3-4 years later that something would come out. So that's what entrepreneurs should be thinking about. But I see too many times that the deals that we look at are 3 months after an event happens. And that's completely wrong.
I kind of second that. Even the Thakker startup, not any US, China already have 5 or 6 Thakker startup got well funded right now. So it's, people after this kind of hype, but I mean, for me, between Docker and OpenStack, Docker is rather a complementary stack, because the OpenStack manage overall data center management, and Docker or either Docker or KVM is just a complementary stack.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
with each other.
The innovation's phenomenal, right? So if you think about it, I'm an engineer by training. I started my first company in the Valley, and it's great to kind of think about, the 5 different, things you're doing different in your technology and why the world should care. But the reality is businesses look at it from a business perspective. And so I argue that Docker and containers arose from the need for agile IT. Because if you're a large financial firm like PayPal, you've got 5 different startups that are going after your business, and they're developing and launching a new release every hour as opposed to every month or every year, right? So the need to develop more frequently and be more agile is an existential threat for a lot of companies. And I think companies like Docker and OpenStack and Mirantis have done a good job of addressing different pieces of that equation in terms of packaging applications fast, more efficiently, continuously integrating, continuously deploying that, and then being able to support net new infrastructure, the storage networking layer that OpenStack enables, for instance. Mm-hmm. The question now is, how do you make it consumable, right? It's like you said, when you and I had a conversation, all these technologies are great, but ultimately the CIO is measured on 5 nines uptime and managing cost as opposed to trying a new technology, right? So how do you take all that technology from a developer to an operation transformation? I think that's where the opportunity lies. So in the container ecosystem in particular, you have stateless containers. How do you maintain persistence across the state of these different containers? How do you monitor and manage transient containers? Because OpenView and BMC Patrol sure as hell can manage them. So what are the monitoring and management capabilities that allow you to do root cause analysis and do SLA of the containers? How do you maintain state across different blocks of storage? How do you provide routing tables between these containers that can allow you to network them appropriately? So the operational aspects of trying any new technology is what I see a lot of the forward-thinking entrepreneurs focusing on, because that's where the puck is going to be a couple of years from now, and that's where you should be focusing on if you're starting a company.
I happen to agree.
Good.
All right, closing question. Operational question. Closing question. The markets have been tumultuous, you could say, in the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
Up and then or down and then back up. A lot of uncertainty internationally with everything going on in China and everything going on in the EU right now. How does that impact your perspective on valuations and your investment thesis? And how do you think about what's going to come between now and the end of the year from a public markets perspective?
Look, I could make much more money as a day trader, but I think in the venture business, we have to take a long-term view because you have highly liquid investments that have a 6 to 8 year horizon. So you can't worry too much about the volatility in the markets. If you fundamentally have a problem that you're solving that a large market cares about, infrastructure as a service, application, packaging, and you find the right team that has the wherewithal to go through the ups and downs, you focus on company building, and when times are tumultuous like they are, you use that as an opportunity to grab great talent and go bring them on board and go build great products. And in this market in particular, where I think on the venture side, there's a lot of hype in the valuations for a number of these companies. I think we're going more and more early stage and trying to find great entrepreneurs in big markets where we have to do a lot of the heavy lifting and a lot of the heavy work for early stage companies. But it's well worth it compared to paying up a crazy price for a company that may or may not materialize. So.
Yeah. For us, I feel it's very positive to have some correction. Last few quarters, we have been very slow in investing given the valuation. We have offered some term sheet, and competitive firm offer double the valuation. So it's very hard to trigger the investment. So I think it's very healthy for the market as well. Then as our firm, we continue to focus on open source space. Other than Mirantis, we also back Couchbase, which is more on the NoSQL mobile database space, and even the drone IoT, that open source is kind of expanding into that. We back more like open source drone OS in that space. So we continue to look at the sector actively. Yeah.
So our best investments have been made when times were very tough, because only a crazy individual will start a company in a tough time, and that's a really motivated individual. Yeah. When times are good, everyone wants to be an entrepreneur, and the quality of entrepreneurship dies. So our best investments are in downtimes, and it gives you, it's easier to hire great people, and it takes time to go build that company. Having said that, the venture investment amounts lag the market. So if the market is doing well, the investments will go up. So if the market does bad, certainly investments are going to fall, especially the momentum as investors run away when the markets go down.
Perfect. Well, that's our time. Thank you very much for participating on the panel, and
Thank you.
look forward to seeing success in your investment portfolio.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.